Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on Scrum for Human Resourcefulness. We will go ahead and give folks a minute or two to join, but for those of you who are already joining, please feel free to take a second and just let us know where you're calling in from. You can just type it directly into chat. Let's see kind of who's here. All right, Carl from Atlanta, welcome. New York, wow, so many. Sao Paulo.
Awesome.
Salt Lake City, that's my hometown.
Hey, Pittsburgh, Julie.
Berlin, Puerto Rico, Netherlands.
Hey, there's Arun. Good to see some familiar names coming up on there and all the new people too. This is awesome. Costa Rica, London. This is cool.
Very cool. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. This is really exciting to see such a global audience. My name is Jessica Larson. I'll be co-hosting the webinar today. I lead the Agile Education and Credentialing Program at Scrum, Inc. I'm also joined by my colleague, Noah Sarusia. She's going to be moderating today. She leads up the training program at Scrum, Inc. So if you have any technical issues or anything like that, you can feel free to reach out to Noah directly. Or, if you have any questions throughout the course of the webinar, please feel free to drop those in the Q&A panel. Noah will be helping us keep track of those to make sure we answer as many of your questions as possible. So please don't hesitate at any time. We will have a section designated at the end of the webinar to answer some of those questions live. So keep them coming. The other thing I wanted to mention is that this webinar is being recorded, so we'll have it available to you on demand afterwards. We'll share the slides and everything like that. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, as you may know, Scrum is the most widely used Agile framework. It's co-created by Dr. Jeff Sutherland, who is the founder of our company, Scrum, Inc. It has been used across many different industries and pretty much every job function to improve the way of work. In particular, it can be used to improve human resourcefulness, and that's what we're here to talk about today. But the framework really helps to address three mega issues that we see in organizations every time we go to work with them. Those are delivering working product every work cycle, being able to refactor your organization to better meet changing market needs, and how to get everybody in an organization aligned to the top priority so that we're all moving in the same direction. So in this webinar, we really want to share some techniques for improving employee engagement and discuss how to address some of the challenges that HR professionals and organizations face when moving toward agile ways of working. Our hope is that you can all really walk away with some techniques, some concrete ideas for helping your organizations and your teams reach new heights in this era of rapid change that we find ourselves in. But with that said, I do want to mention that this is not just a webinar for human resource teams. It is a webinar for everybody who's involved in the organizational ecosystem that HR supports. So, we're really glad to have you all here. And with that, I am extremely thrilled to introduce the amazing Beth Davis. Beth is truly a thought leader in the Agile space, particularly with regard to HR. She's got decades of experience working in HR, and is a very experienced people development leader. She's recognized for her ability to creatively align business strategy and people practices while keeping a passionate focus on workplace culture and values. And her experience spans the globe. She's worked with multi-billion-dollar organizations as well as high-growth entrepreneurial startups. So really excited to hear from you, Beth. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today.
My joy, right? Not even my pleasure, it's my joy. I'm so happy to be here. And I would type in, I'm here in Pittsburgh, PA, so shout out to all of us Pittsburghers and everyone from around the world. And I saw some familiar names from the community out there, and it's just great to have everybody here. And it's interesting, Noah's and Jess often ask me, why do you care so much about this? And I think, I've been passionate about this idea that humans are not resources for let's see, the 20 years I've been working as a professional. And I do believe that everyone has, human resourcefulness in them, right? And I say that because my first job out of college, and I'll date myself, 1999, was at a startup here in Pittsburgh, and we were called People Development back then. And I just thought, that's amazing. That's great. We're people development. Let's collaborate. Let's create things together. And an article came out in 2005 from Fast Company that's literally titled "Why We Hate HR." And at first I was so offended. I thought, oh my gosh, how could you hate us? Like, this is the best profession ever. And as I read the article, I was like, wow, I think I would hate HR too, if that's how we did it. And that's, I say that up front because one, I have a tremendous amount of passion for this work. And I believe very strongly in the profession and what we can do to create amazing workplaces that do good things with and for others. And it's not to blame and shame, right? I think there is this propensity to want to blame and shame HR or to point the finger or to beat ourselves up. And what I'm really here to do today is not be an expert teller, but really share passion, share experiences with you in the hopes that you walk away with some enthusiasm minimally, but also some key things you could actually do to bring this into your organization. So whether those of you who are on the line that I know are HR practitioners, helping empower what you're already doing, because I know many of you are already doing these things, but also how to get back into, if you're coming at this from an agile coaching perspective or from a, internal using Scrum perspective, how could you invite the other parts of your organization into this journey? So with that, Jessica, any other questions you want to throw my way before I jump in?
Sure. I mean, on that note, I was just going to ask, what is the role of HR when a company's undergoing change or change, an agile transformation, that kind of thing. So what is the role? What does it actually mean to bring Scrum as a framework into the HR arena?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what's interesting to me always is, I've worked with plenty of teams, Scrum teams, coaching them, on the product development side. So even though I was joking to say I've come from HR, I've also spent a lot of time working in business with product development and systems and things like that. And often what gets in the way of true success, I think, when teams want to shift to this way of working and being together, we haven't included HR because either there's no relationship or it's an afterthought. And I think that the more you invite them in to observe it and see it in action and understand the intentions of it, that it's not just a framework to do something different or to be agile, so to speak. It's helping people understand to say, wow, that's going to change how we do recruitment, or we might have to think about performance management differently, or we might have to think about everything differently. And instead of fighting against it, again, making that invitation to say, why don't you come to a sprint review, see what we're actually doing? Have a chance to sit down with a Scrum Master or a product owner. What is your job? How has it changed? And it's creating those relationships that I think are really important. And then, on the other side of that, the other side of the coin, and I'm going to jump us forward is, and this slide is super busy if you're online on purpose, because, how could you think about using Scrum in HR? And I've always had a love affair with the framework because it's about dealing with complexity. And a lot of people will say, HR is just hiring and firing and payroll, right? And not everyone sees it that way, but a lot of people do, or they see it as an administrative function to process transactions, which we do that too. So the view that you see on the screen, I actually created for an organization that was a global healthcare analytics firm that I joined as their first head of HR. And we were really trying to show them, like, we have 3 people. This is all that we're responsible for. And oh, by the way, we're trying to align to strategic priorities. We're also partnering internally across the globe. We're focused on results. We also want to link to our company values, but we have operational things to do: payroll, benefits, transactional flawlessness, systems, compliance, right? We worked in 7 different states plus India and the UK. We had immigration work that we were doing. Everyone wanted reporting and metrics. We also wanted to be good service partners. Plus, we were going to recruit, develop, and retain and engage everybody. If that doesn't make you just gasp or feel a bit anxious, and I know my HR colleagues on the phone are like, yeah, and there's so much more. I think that this is where I started to think about Scrum as a way to really deal with this reality. And you're working with also outsourced partners. You're dealing with unexpected events as well as people, right? We have this unique needs of people. And I think why I show this is it's complexity in action. And so as somebody who learned about Scrum about 10 years ago and just immediately was drawn to it, I'm like leaning into the camera because I said, that's how I want to work. And this idea of the interrupt buffer and dealing with swarming on the most important things. I mean, you think about current reality with COVID, some organizations were able to deal with it pretty seamlessly, right? Others were not, and so how do we also deal with the unexpected things like a flood or somebody gets sick or, someone gets pregnant, and they're going to be out for a while. How can we balance that? And I do believe that, in larger HR organizations, you have often the one HR initiative going on. And, the thing is, the whole company already sees you as one HR, but when you don't see yourselves that way, again, this is another opportunity to silo bust. And I think by sharing the responsibility for HR, not just within the function, but with others, by inviting our customers in, right? Because who's our customer, everybody? Those of you in HR on the phone, throw that in the chat. Who's your customer? And I think if we can't see that it's everyone, we want to check ourselves of why we joined this profession in the first place.
Absolutely. So you've talked about a lot of things. I'm curious, what are some of the specifics? Like how actually can you achieve better results using the framework? How do you actually do this?
Because a lot of people will say, it's a framework. How in the world are you actually going to get engagement from it? And those of you on the phone, some of you I know who are here have seen this drawing, and you all can laugh at me if you don't know me. There's a reason I'm not an artist for a living, but I became aware of the work, the service profit chain, 1994. And, if you think about it, employee engagement is really not an initiative, right? It's not, let's have an initiative. Let's have an award ceremony. Let's give free beer on Fridays. I loved that, by the way, at my first, it was fun. But that didn't engage me. But the idea is if we can actually get to know people at a deeper level, understand that not everyone's intrinsically motivated by the same things, but to truly engage people, put that first, right? Who's going to feel that? Well, your customers, right? And if you're using Scrum to build products and you're not involving your customers, or if you are and your people are miserable because we haven't done the culture work, that's going to show up pretty quickly. And oftentimes people will want to blame the framework, right? They'll want to say, well, it's because we started using Scrum. Well, no, what Scrum did was amplify all the stuff, the funkiness that was going on. But if you can focus on your people, get them engaged, and we'll talk about principles here in a second, your customers will feel it and you will make the money or get the results that you're striving for, and you'll get to persist and keep going and thrive as a business. And you'll become an attraction culture. I hear so often this like war for talent. I'm like, could we stop the war and just say, let's attract people and realize that we want people to feel good about their choice to work with us, to share their time and talents with us, and realize that people are going to leave. But if they can leave having had a good experience, you can say, I had a great experience at, XYZ company, go work there. It'll be great for you, versus seeing it as a war, for talent, if that makes sense. And it's this idea of let's get over this idea of an initiative and just start to build it in. And I think Scrum, with the principles that it stands on and the values, really helps start to bring this to life.
So tell me, with regard to the values, because of course Scrum as a framework is upheld by the values, but organizations tend to have their own sets of values. Like, how do these things work together in practice?
Yeah, I love that question. So the Scrum values, so one, I'm leaning on some courage today, a little bit of moxie, if you will. And I think, the courage and respect and the openness and the values themselves, focus too is, they're not going to work against any corporate values. You put them up against any company values, respect, dignity, graciousness, whatever they are. The Scrum values are only going to amplify your existing core values. And I think a takeaway, if you're working in a Scrum context, is going back and saying, look at the values and say, do they work against any of our company values? Probably not. They're actually going to amplify them. And similarly, if you're one of those companies who's never yet really invested in defining our values, who are we, how do we want to be together, start with the Scrum values and see if that interests people, and furthermore, I believe that Scrum also thrives on a culture rooted in principles, right? Standing on the Agile principles. And these are a handful of them. There's many, right? These are just ones that I really, it's really about, weaving these things together. So if the number one thing in the manifesto is individuals and interactions over process and tools, right? Okay, step one, right? But we're trying to create value for customers. But if we don't have trust, if our psychological safety, meaning it's not safe to say I don't know, I don't understand, or I disagree in our organizations, we're not really confident to lead ourselves, right? I'm a huge fan of self-leadership. Lead yourself, you lead your life, right? You lead yourself, and be able to look in the mirror and say, am I helping us get better, or am I part of the drama? And what's my responsibility for how I'm showing up on these teams? Servant leadership for me is the root of how I lead. I made my own transition in leadership styles about 10 years ago, and I'm still learning about that. But I believe in, servant leadership is everyone's choice that they can make about helping others get better and stronger, because you'll get better and stronger too. And in order to allow self-organization to thrive, that's the leadership style that has to be there, right? Self-organization is needing that kind of leadership style, so that someone like me can let go and say, here's where we're trying to get to, but I want the team's collective intelligence to come together and come up with the best ideas, instead of being, ego driven, or just like, hey, I have a lot of ideas. Empowering others, reaching across boundaries, inviting others in to work with you, and the transparency, does bring out the funkiness. But if you can deal in your reality and continuously inspect and adapt, you're going to be stronger. And I'll just make a quick shout out. I do work with a community called Agile People. There's a global community of us that do some work in more on the principle side of this. And we do have a book coming out. I did write a chapter on self-organization. So just shout out to the 35 other global authors that came together. And I do that too, because I'm not the only one out there in the HR space who believes this and cares about this. I'm here today to really just like amplify, how do we do this, and how do we do more of it together?
That's awesome. And you make some really good points about, what are some of the factors that lead to success in this type of an initiative or, approach. I'm curious especially with respect to the culture of an organization, what are the things you see as most challenging or even blocking, organizations' efforts to increase and improve agility?
Yeah. I think it comes down to our why. It's what's our shared purpose, because there's this trend of like, we're all going to be agile and we're doing an agile transformation. And I know there's good intended people behind that, but I'm like, that's not your goal, is it? These are things that will help you reach your greater goal. So if you're kind of going down this path without a real aim of, why are we doing this? Is it to create a better patient experience? Is it better to, are we trying to lead the market to do something amazing in a space that needs something new? Are we trying to go to the moon, or go to Mars, right? It's why. And I think sometimes people can kind of catch the fever, so to speak. I want to do Scrum too. It sounds like fun, but that's not the only reason to do it. And I think that if an organization is really trying to go forward, there has to be a connected purpose. And we'll talk a little bit later about some examples of things that I've been involved in where the delivery side of using Scrum for delivery to reach some aim together is exceptionally powerful to create that engaged and attraction culture that we talked about. But absent that, you're going to kind of bump up into it. And I bring this slide up. I do some work with a community called 3 Vital Questions, and it's around self-leadership and dealing with our choices to create or perpetuate workplace and life drama or not. It's really fun stuff. We could do a whole other session on that. But Peter Senge's work on creating a learning organization really, I think, makes this point we just said. So, every organization, for-profit, not-for-profit, government, what have you, everyone is doing some type of service delivery, right? Or product delivery. Every single one. And, you think about the dimension of work around designing and implementing systems, processes, and structures. HR spends a lot of time there. And Scrum fits nicely there when you look at it from the framework window, right? So the framework window of Scrum goes there. And that's great. It definitely sits there. I think, seeing that if we deny the change leadership that is necessary to have people work together differently, right? If Scrum is like foist upon them, or we don't understand it, or we think it's a fad, we're denying how people think, how they feel, how they interact. And that's often why these change efforts fail to reach their desired results. And often I jokingly, and I don't say this because of the book of Twice the Work in Half the Time, but I think if you don't think about this cultural side, and we'll talk in a second about where HR fits in, you get what I affectionately say is better sameness, just a little bit faster. And we all know that that's not what we want. We want to really improve our workplaces to make them healthy and do great things in the world.
Absolutely. Well, that all sounds great. Let's talk a little bit about how you actually put Scrum to work in HR.
Yeah. And it's funny because there was a, I'll just do a shout out. There was a debate happening on LinkedIn yesterday. I was watching two gentlemen. If you're here, it was awesome to watch, about, real Scrum doesn't exist outside of product development. And I respect that. I respect people's points of view on these things. I also respectfully say, I think there is great possibility for this to be a way of working, not just in HR, but frankly, for all of our companies. And I'll tell you why in a minute. So first example, right? This screen makes my eyes hurt. I hope it probably stresses you out. So from a truly HR perspective, this is a graphic around all these different HR tech companies who are trying to reinvent HR, right? And they are bringing products forward to solve your problems. And there's a lot of great products. And on the right-hand side, I've worked with 5 of those companies to actually either implement or re-implement those systems. And I kind of jokingly say individuals and actions or process and tools, ? And I think often in HR, if you've ever been, those of you on the phone, if you've ever gone to the national conference, SHRM National Conference, there's usually about 50 or 60,000 HR people that converge somewhere. And there's usually like 5,000 or 6,000 vendors there, of which about 80% are selling you technology to solve your problems in HR. And I respect entrepreneurial nature. I work on products and I think they're great. But I think if you're one of those providers, this is also an opportunity for you to say, how can we learn more about Scrum and Agile principles as an implementation partner, and how we show up to help organizations get the benefits of using our tools that we believe in, but make it about the why before the tool. And then similarly, the story I'm about to share is sometimes you don't get to buy a product. And so an example I want to share, and I did see Kristen, a former colleague who was at this company with me, is on the line. So Kristen, hey, good to have you here. We actually did do Scrum in HR, and it was to create a manager and employee self-service capability. So the background was the company was a multi-billion-dollar kind of diversified engineering, manufacturing, maintenance organization with about 25,000 employees at the time. And it had 5 divisions. It had grown through acquisitions, very entrepreneurially, hundreds of sites and locations, it's exceptional complexity. And there was a bunch of different policies, a bunch of different processes, different systems, and they implemented JD Edwards, which that dates me a little bit, but JD Edwards has at the time, they might now, at the time, no user interface, no user experience. It was like a green screen for data. And we said, well, how do we go 100% paperless and automate everything non-benefits related for HR with all the approvals, processes, and transactions for manager and employee self-service without buying a new system? It was like, oh, okay, how can we do that? And we did it. And what that was is we had sponsorship from our head of HR, who was also the CIO of this company. And we got a cross-functional team together. I led it from an ops standpoint. We had 2 developers. I still remember Cody and Jason. They were SQL developers who were on the team, as well as our HRIS members, business partners, employees, and managers. And we took a value stream approach to it, where we actually picked a transaction that had policy and stuff associated with and created the interface, used SharePoint. And I know a lot of people still don't like SharePoint. I was like, we ran a whole self-service system on SharePoint for 25,000 people. It was great. Because what did we do? We co-created it together, and every 2 weeks we had a sprint review, and we were demonstrating working transactions, workflows. People were testing as we went. We got testing done out in the field so that, folks on construction sites, different than the office, people who were mobile, and we incrementally rolled it out. So we didn't just say, great, turn on a feature, or wait until we had a whole system, like, Workday fully implemented, turn on all the switches and no one uses it. we delivered it about every month, and we had impediments, logs. We sent it daily. Like, here's the next thing that came up. It's a payroll issue. Let's, okay, get someone from payroll in here. And we went 100% paperless in 2 years. And it was awesome. And it was so inspiring. And we added no additional cost to the organization. So I thought that was a pretty cool example. And it was fun. It was hard work, but it was actually a lot of fun. And I just said, I don't ever want to work differently ever again.
So what did it take to actually make that happen? Like, what aspects, if you could point to any, were the key success factors?
Yeah, I think it was obviously the support, to do it differently. And the whole company wasn't working this way. Coming into this, I was a PMP, and got traditional project management. And I just was like, this just didn't feel natural to me. And I asked, could we do something different? And I think so what it took was having someone who was inspired, but also I was, I think, wise enough to invite people in and explain that why, and persistence, and also, letting people know what we were trying to do. And it wasn't just a fad. It was, that's awesome. Kristen, thanks for that call out. It took collaboration. You had 5 divisions that had 5 different presidents with 5 different cultures, and we're trying to come together and standardize where we could, and also let enough latitude that it didn't matter that you have a different approval flow. Certain divisions, like the president, had to sign off on everything. Well, we weren't there to change that. We were trying to make it easier for them to do it themselves. And I think understanding who our customers were and saying that, the teams out on a turnaround on a maintenance plant that have 2 weeks to turn around a huge, facility, their needs are very different than the environmental and infrastructure teams that are, doing work out in the field. And then the corporate team has different needs. So, okay, what do you want? Let's build it. And it was a lot of fun. But I think it took the invitation and inviting people in and appreciating the differences. So, we're going to talk about Scrum at Scale here in a second. I saw the question come in too. So maybe one more example. I have a couple more, but we could overwhelm for days. And again, I know some of you on the phone, if you're doing this, I saw a few familiar faces who I know are dabbling in this, please throw them in the chat too, because I'm not the only one. This is just me, being passionate, wanting to spark enthusiasm. Here's some more examples. You'll see a variety of them. Before I talk about them, I think that it's really, the applications are endless when you recognize that everything's in service to the employment experience, meaning beginning to end. And if we're thinking in those terms as that's our product, it changes everything. And there were some questions that came in about performance management. We could talk about that for a whole other session, but I do feel strongly, as someone who has led enterprise performance management at some big companies, that Scrum is a ready-made performance management approach. You get everything you need. You get multi-rater feedback, you get 360 feedback, you get incremental change, you get retrospection, you get coaching. Like, what else do you need? And if we can start to shift towards, separating it from compensation, which, again, in these ways of working, we're going to have to change comp and the way we think about rewards. We're going to have to think differently about recruiting. That's okay. And the one example I called out was another larger enterprise, a health delivery system, where we did create a career and comp structure framework for the 3,000 person IT organization. And we did it, again, cross-functionally with IT leaders who volunteered to help create this with some of us in HR, some compensation folks. And it was about creating the organization that they wanted to lead in the future, and that people that were in it wanted to be a part of. And so that was very provocative in that, usually HR goes off and does it and then comes back and says, okay, here's your structure, or read the descriptions we wrote for you. And that's fine. But we wanted to do it different because we wanted to create a high involvement, experience where there were a lot of fingerprints on it, because from a change adoption standpoint, it was seamless because the leaders we would meet, every day. They would work on different descriptions and they would go do research. And again, this is an $8 billion system. This isn't like a startup. And then they would go back to their respective teams and get feedback and ask questions to say, well, wait, if I'm in telecom and I move over to one of the systems teams, what's that going to look like? And we're like, yeah, what is that going to look like? And so we need to get recruiting involved on this team now, because we now see a connection. And again, it was doing it with and for the people doing the work instead of us feeling like, well, that's an HR thing. You really can't get involved. So, and there's lots more stories I could tell. But I just think, again, the scaling of this, these are some examples of projects, but there's also an opportunity to run an entire function, if not company, in this way.
These are really great examples, but they're kind of focused on larger organizations. I'm curious, do you think, at least in your experience, do you have to be a large organization to really benefit from bringing Scrum into HR?
No, that's my short end. No. And here's why. And again, I love my visualizations because I think people can relate. So let's talk about this. You could be, and I know a few people, you may actually be here, that are the one man or woman hired into a company to do HR. Fine. Okay. And some of that's because some businesses don't think they need HR at all. Or we're still in startup phase. We don't need all that yet. And my attitude there is, but if you have aspirations to grow or be acquired, get it right now, because when you're 20 million, 30 million, 300 million, and you haven't figured it out, that's when your life becomes miserable. And so from that perspective, I look at this as, if you're the one person, and let's say you're in a 50-person company, there's 50 more people who could join your team. Because if you share responsibility and say, we got to create a new onboarding program, or we want to create a new internship program, or we want to redo performance management, make the invitation, get all the skills necessary on the team. You'll find out that people have been managers, maybe worked in HR, and have lots of smart ideas. Use Scrum, right? Because you can actually then get more done because you're inviting people in to create the process, policies, programs that they actually want to be a part of leading or participating in. So to me, it's like a double whammy of getting things done while engaging people in change because you're inviting them to do it with you. So that's the small side. I've been in organizations where the team is small but mighty. Some of you are on this call. I saw you jump in. This idea of, okay, we're a small team and we're doing everything. That first slide I showed you, and we've got outsourced partners, and how are we ever going to get this done? Again, we used Scrum. We also used Kanban a little bit, which I'll share, but using Scrum to say, okay, I'm a smaller enterprise. How do I create focus by having a backlog of here's all the things, right, that we've got going on? It makes the case for, do we need to grow our team? Do we need to outsource more? Do we want to spin up more Scrum teams to help get more done? Because our team has 4 people, and we're hiring like crazy, and we want to deliver value. So for me as the leader in that situation, it helped me make the case to the executives of what we were investing in. And then on the far side in the large enterprises, if you put on the hat of a CHRO, to this day, there's still HR people who are like, we want to be seen as more strategic. Okay, this is being strategic, and it's not about your seat at the table. I'm almost like, forget your seat at the table, just go stand up and just get at it. Like let the seat sit there. There's work to do. And I mean that respectfully, but this idea that if I'm a CHRO and I've got centers of expertise, I've got HR business partners, we're trying to align to the company priorities, having that scaled backlog of what are we investing in, where are we spending our time? Because, then you don't get the warring factions within HR that are, well, wait, I got to roll my thing out, or when do I get to go first? Or we want to do this. It's okay, run it like a Scrum. We've got a backlog, let's prioritize it on value. But let's not decide for the company. Let's ask, here's all the stuff that we could be working on. What's most important? And I think that to me is where the scaling elements come in of, and why I love Scrum at Scale so much. When I came up in January to hang out with you all, it's this idea of getting lots of visibility and transparency, because you've got HR's initiatives, you've got finance doing stuff, supply chain, we're serving products, sales has things going on, so does marketing. As a CEO, I don't know about any other CEOs, but I've coached quite a few. You're stressed out of your mind because there's just all this coming at you. Well, what if you ran your whole business this way, right? And again, that's a larger conversation. But I think really that's the power of it, not just from moving impediments, with the executive action team, but at the meta level, like a whole company, could run this way. So one woman's opinion, I guess, but a very passionate one. And here's just a quick example. And that is my husband, by the way. John is the one who introduced me to Scrum because he came from product development and commercial software development. And when I learned about it 10 years ago from him, I was like, I'm doing that. That sounds like fun. So I'm giving him a quick shout out. And he is also a trainer. But this was kind of that example I just talked you through of my pictures of, we've got day-to-day HR, we've got our wall of crazy with just whatever shows up. So we did bring Kanban in first to just help manage the flow of crazy. So if you're a service center, right, Kanban's a great way to get started. But then the Scrum side, I always look at it as the time box to say, like, what are we going to get done in the next week or two? What's our focus now? What have we learned, with our company? Re-implementing a system where people weren't punching in and out. All the HR people just cringed because we didn't know who clocking in and out. Like, you have a heart attack about stuff like that. That's risk for the company. But we created a Scrum team that had people from the different departments to re-implement it. And then we got to opportunity backlog investment for the whole company. So it was everyone's initiatives ran through this. And I thought, gosh, isn't that a powerful way to work instead of having this, warring factions, resource allocation traps, people living in silos, or maybe we have a more engaged workplace. I don't know. So what, right? So what now what? And I want to leave room for questions. I think, as those of you that are on the phone, whether you're in HR or not, some key takeaways to me is go back and figure out what your backlog is. It's an interesting activity to go through if you can rally everyone to get all the initiatives laid out and ask yourselves this question: who are we creating value for? Is it for us? Is it for our customers? What's it in service to, right? And it can start to have a different dialogue of shared ownership, minimally within your team, but then within an entire organization, shared ownership. Here's all the stuff we could be working on for you. What's most important? The silo busting nature of this, I think, is another way to think about it. And I always talk about share, right? To me, everyone's responsible for HR. HR professionals and our expertise helps others become wildly successful. And we can create practices and programs with and for others. It feels good. And I had someone tell me years ago, if you really love people, Beth, you shouldn't work in HR. And that devastated me early in my career because I was like, you know what? No, I do love people. And I think we all deserve a chance to go to work, enjoy, have autonomy, mastery, purpose, and then go home at night without taking the stress with us. And maybe this is a way to start doing that. Look at your company values and Scrum values, see how they support you, what you could do more to amplify them in action, and try to diagnose some of those principles. What's present, how can we do more of it, call it out, celebrate it, but for what's missing, what's in the way and what could accelerate them. So that's all I had for the group. I'm, like I said, exceptionally passionate about this because I think there's so much good we can do to keep our workplaces healthy now and ongoing.
Awesome. Well, we have received several questions during the talk, so why don't we see if we can get through some of those and get some people some answers. So on that note, and kind of, harking back to Scrum at Scale, I know, part of the core of Scrum at Scale is really implementing a minimum viable bureaucracy. So one of the questions that we've gotten is about, HR appearing to be in the business of protecting hierarchy more than people. And the question is, how did you operate that mindset shift toward embracing Scrum? And how do you collaborate with other HR peers who may be reluctant to experiment with Scrum?
Yeah, wow, that's a huge question. I think part of it for me was, 10 years ago, in my early 30s, I was in a senior role in a large organization, being successful and also being exceptionally miserable. And it was an organization that in some ways did put you in a bit of a golden cage, and at the time it felt good. And then I realized, but I'm so stressed and I'm so miserable, and people are quitting and people are sad and no one's having a good time at work. And yeah, work doesn't always have to be fun, but it really got to me personally. And I stepped back and said, there has to be another choice. And that's where I initially started on my servant leadership journey to understand these other choices and looking in the mirror and doing the work with myself first to say, like, how do I want to show up? Right? Because how this hierarchical way of being and being the person that signs off on everything and makes decisions about people's jobs and whether they get fired or not, just is sucking the life out of me, honestly. And I think that was, the first step is then reconnecting to what do I want to do with my time? I have a favorite Mary Oliver quote, which is, tell me what it is that you will do with your one wild and precious life. And so I want to do good with and for people. And I want workplaces to be places where people feel that they're safe and that they can do awesome things. And it's not going to take a toll on their real life. And so I think leading with that passion, but then asking others, why do you do what you do? What's your purpose? What do you value? And then what's in the way of that? Because sometimes in HR, we do have to put bureaucracy in place to protect the company, right? Because, in the US alone, 50 states, federal laws, it's insane and everyone's different. And then as you start to scale globally, laws and you want to protect companies. You don't want to do something that's going to end you up in court or worse, that your company goes away because you did something unintentionally, hopefully. But sometimes this behavioral stuff gets in the way too. So we've got to deal with the being and the doing together. And I think that the bureaucracy, it's asking ourselves why, right? Netflix has a great, or it's Nordstrom's, their handbook is basically, do what's some version of do what's right when no one's there to tell you what to do. Like, meaning treat people like responsible adults, right? Rather than assuming most of us are about 12, that when we come into the workplace, even though people are your most expensive line item on your balance sheet, let's assume people have good intentions. And COVID, I think, just to double down on that, proved a belief that I've held for a long time, is that you can work remote. You don't have to see people to know. People want to work. People enjoy work in the right conditions. And I remember telling someone, like, let's not lay people off. Let's get rid of our rent. I'm not saying buildings aren't important, but some companies, you don't need a building to work. No, we got to cut a head count. And now, all these years later, unfortunately, COVID happened, but I think it proved the point that people can be trusted. And if you can't trust the people that you've hired, then why did you hire them in the first place? So it gets into the deeper psychology of people look at what they stand to lose, and ego, it's not no ego, but containing our egos. But if our comp structures are also such that we're rewarding certain behaviors and actions, or we're not even considering behaviors, we're just looking at productivity, you kind of get what you get. So do you want to change that, is kind of the question.
Right. So
that was like a completely long-winded answer that may have answered 6 other questions, but it all threads at some level.
Right. Totally. So in organizations that are doing Scrum well, what specific ways have you seen HR work with teams to accomplish things that maybe have traditionally fallen into the HR's focus or management's focus, like hiring team members or even firing team members?
Yeah. And that's part of it too. I think gets back to that, self-leadership and self-organization on principles. I think it's, can you equip people to do the right things and to have the hard conversations? That's where I think HR can continuously, you work with your outsource partners. Like I think there's a lot of good to inviting your outsource partners to help you deal with a lot of the administration, so that you can spend more time helping others learn how to coach each other. And deal with the reality, so that, when something spins up on a Scrum team, you don't have to run and find a manager or HR, that we've equipped you to deal with it by giving you workshops and opportunities like the 3 vital questions I talked about. When drama spikes, what do we do? Let's do strengths finders together and learn more about each other, or let's understand our values, so that on the tough day when Jessica and I are working together and we're getting on each other's nerves, it doesn't become a fight. It doesn't become low productivity. It's like, yeah, Beth, you're overusing your strength of communication right now. Like, oh, thanks for the feedback, versus like, oh God, she's so annoying. And that kind of creates drama. So I think it's wrapping around the Scrum teams in developing not just the use of the frameworks, but also the human side of it, so that the teams can deal with themselves, and that Scrum Masters and product owners as leaders around these teams, kind of helping guide, can play that coaching role. And then, when the leaders around these teams are struggling, it's not to say, oh, it's the leaders, fault. It's, well, how can we help them, look in the mirror, and how do we share this, versus this idea of, us versus them, and that toxicity that just creates so much cost and churn and waste quite frankly, in organizations time and again. And that's where turnover and all that. So let's not focus on turnover. Let's focus on engagement. It's not even just about retention. People are going to leave. But when they're there, are they engaged in doing something great for the time that they share with you? That's great. We should, especially at least in the US, it's an employment at will, I mean, it's a little bit easier to move around.
So can you share maybe some specifics on how you have either seen or yourself implemented Agile and Scrum values into some appraisal or, kind of performance review, career progression processes?
Yeah, it's great. And I do see Boris there too about asked to join HR to reinvent performance management. That is another way. If you're the HR people and Scrum is happening elsewhere, go figure out who the Scrum Masters are or the product owners or who's on the team and just go talk, right? And say tell me about it. Why do you like it? That's a first easy step. Implementing it, it's going to depend on the organization. I think in Scrum, minimally, even if if the whole company isn't in it yet, have the conversations in retrospectives. I have a product that I use that I'm building called Loop, actually, that's about that. How do we reflect on using our values? How are the values helping us get to our sprint goal? Are we leaning on them at all? And I think talking about them, right? And then calling it out hey, Jessica, that was courage in action, and saying and here's why. Or, this is all stealing our focus. Let's lean on focus. What can we do to get our focus back? Actually bringing the vocabulary forward, not assessing on it, not, rating yourselves on it in terms of a performance, right? But really, are we leveraging it or not? I think is a better way to think about it. Did we get a lot done this sprint? Yes, we did. But were we respectful about it? No, we weren't. We actually went against principles. We didn't follow our definition of done. We were not doing what we said we would do. Let's hold ourselves responsible for our behaviors. I think those are important ways to let the teams be empowered to reflect that on themselves. But as an organization, the same thing goes true. Are we living our values in action or not? Enron had values too. And, things happen when you don't stand on something.
So the next question is on Scrum and, really working in a Scrum at scale environment. So maybe a little more specific to the framework, but the question is for an organization where product development is already operating using Scrum at scale, how could you expand that to bring in the HR organization? And, some more specifics, would that be a chief product owner that represents the HR priorities at the executive meta Scrum level? Would there be separate teams of only HR professionals, some blend, or, have you seen, what have you seen work best?
My favorite answer, and this will make everyone irritated, is it depends. But it does depend because there is no one roadmap. And I think getting yourself past this idea of following a recipe or a prescription, if you follow this prescription, this is exactly how you will scale it, right? I think what I personally have always loved about Scrum at Scale is it gives you enough construct to figure out what's our recipe, right? Because you're Spotify, you're not Spotify. So don't try to be Spotify, find out what works, but also find your own best practice. Best practice is past practice. So let's find our own. But I think it depends, right? In a smaller organization, I could see a highly engaged CEO being the chief product owner, meaning they have total cost of ownership for everything that's happening in that company, and if I was a CEO, that's how I would see it, right? I would say, gosh, we've got to make decisions that serve us all well, right? We can't work against purpose in our companies, whether it's internal teams and external teams, because, the different organizational constructs, if we're trying to go to market and be competitive and stay ahead of the game, and then we start to shift all of our focus internally, that's not always the best thing. But sometimes you can't not look internally. So I think you could have HR running as its own, Scrum at scale within HR, depending on the size, but it's still got to roll somewhere, because at some point you're going to bump up against finance, you're going to bump up against legal, you're going to bump up against risk and compliance stuff, internal audit stuff. It's all interconnected. And I think in our organizations, if we see us all as we're all sharing responsibility, no one function is more important than the other, I think that then changes why are we doing this? It comes back to the why, and I think that's where I go all the way back to the beginning of we want to engage people. and have people feel like they've made a good choice to share their time and talent with your company because they feel part of something rather than I'm just another resource or I'm a head count, and that's what makes me so passionate, because I think that humans deserve better and that we can also do amazing things together. And the HR, HR can definitely use Scrum, and Scrum needs HR to thrive. And sometimes there's relationships that don't exist. And I think that now's the time. I mean, I've been passionate about this for years, and I can't wait to see more and more people embracing this and doing good things together.
Great. So could you share some best practices and techniques for really getting started while the train has already left the station?
Yeah. I think it's, again, there's no roadmap. I think it's, there's a great quote from a movie called The Patriot, aim small, miss small. And I say that often, in that when you want to get started with this, particularly in HR, aim small, miss small. Like, don't go after the huge system implementation. Like, one of the teams I worked with is we started with open enrollment and benefits plan design. We were just like, no one other than Beth has any experience with this, and we have a great broker. And I was like, let's Scrum it. And we did enough to get started. We had our, we set our goal. We had our daily Scrum. Every Friday we had our review. And in 4 weeks, with a lot of pressure, in 4 weeks, we had to get open enrollment going because there was some turnover and stuff like that. It was a big deal, but it was also focused, and it created focus for us. And it allowed me as a leader to say, hey, there's all this other stuff that needs attention. I'm new here, but this is the most important thing. And I had the backing of all the rest of the executive team to say, when people started kind of complaining, if you will, about other things that weren't working so good, we're like, we know it's on the backlog. And I think that's the other step is start looking at just all the things you're working on and say, is there an opportunity to do one of these projects or initiatives differently? Where could we start and do an experiment and learn from it? If it totally bombs, you still are going to learn something from it, right? Whether it's how we think about ourselves, our skill sets, what we thought we knew about our internal employees and customers' wants. But isn't that better than not knowing? Right? Maybe that's too pie in the sky, but it's like, try and experiment, see what happens, and make it safe for it to also go completely bad.
Well, thank you. I mean, I know the field is just rich with opportunity, as you said. We did get a lot more questions than we were able to answer, but I'm very excited to share that this is only the beginning of Scrum and HR and the journey that we're all on together. So
yeah, and Jessica, definitely, and I'll say this to the group, send the questions over, and maybe I'm seeing some chatter about ways to stay connected, LinkedIn and otherwise. Maybe we can post those questions out and use that as a way to continue to create some community around this. And I'm going to share the last slide too, because I know we've got a class coming up as well.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I mean, actually a lot of the questions we've got have been really interesting and around kind of more technical aspects of Scrum, like how to create an HR backlog and that kind of thing. And I know you'll be covering a lot of that in the class. So I wanted to just quickly shout out that Beth Davis and our own McCall Baguette will be teaching a live online course on September 21st and 22nd that really takes a deep dive into how to utilize Scrum in HR and how HR can support an organization that is undergoing dramatic change and or an agile transformation or something like that. The course itself will result in a Scrum Master credential and a unique HR badge, so that's kind of fun. And we also wanted, as a thank you for joining, to offer 20% off. So if you just use that customer code there, Scrum HR20, when you register on Scrum Inc.'s website at the checkout, that'll take 20% off. Or you can use that QR code there. So I'm really looking.
I'm just writing in the chat. I'm like, honestly, like I'm overwhelmed with joy. And some of you who know me know that this has been such a passion area for me for so long. And it's time, and I think there's so many of us that care so much about doing great things together that I can't wait to see what we're all able to do together to continue to make our workplaces that much more amazing, and all the good things that we can take to market, not just HR, but like, what can we do if our workplaces are healthy? Like, what can we solve? What can we achieve? What new breakthroughs will come, in this next decade if we start to make these shifts towards working together in new ways. So I'm just super excited and inspired. So thank you all for being here, and thanks for the invitation, Scrum Inc.
Yeah, our pleasure. Thank you so much. This is awesome. All of this information will be shared with everybody in the next 24 hours or so, so stay tuned for that. And, once again, thank you so much, Beth, for sharing all your experiences and insights. I'm very inspired and can't wait to learn more in your course next month.
Awesome. Bye, everybody.